Awesome. You know what? I do this thing now where I used to like do all this research before I spoke with people,
Mhm,
and I hated it because then I'd come into like all these preconceived notions and everything else, and I'd much rather just kind of let it go and see where we end up.
mhm.
Um, what are you doing nowadays? I mean, originally when I first reached out to you, we've been trying to do this podcast together now for a little while. Uh,
Yeah.
we're not successful so far, but right now, what are you doing with your life? What's your job right now?
Well, I'm still doing the same thing as I've been doing for many, many years, which is running She Does the City, which is a website, a blog, a community, whatever you want to call it, that's been around since 2007. We are a platform for women in Canada. We share stories. We have large focus on the arts and culture in Canada, and we also have a huge um, editorial mandate to share stories of recovery.
Okay.
So, yeah,
Okay.
that's what I've been doing.
And so when I reached out, I mean, Jen and I have a bit of a brief history way back
Yeah,
when. Jen and I
yeah.
actually went to high school together. And I was I felt like a visitor. I feel like I was a visitor at Havergal just because
Mhm.
I went there for all of a whole year, and I felt like I immersed myself in this world where you guys had this like community that I didn't understand and had to
Mhm.
learn in a hurry. And so we parted ways, and I actually saw your work through She Does a City. That's where
Mm.
you kind of popped back into my life.
Right.
Now, She Does a City is your baby.
Yeah.
You are the creator. You are the brains behind this. What kind of motivated you to start this? What was your drive in starting She Does a City, and kind of what was your goal with it? Like where were you
Right.
hoping that was going to go? Cuz it took off.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it was such a different time. We're going back to 2007, so this is like pre-Twitter. This is the word blog was like a lot of people didn't know what that word meant, and the internet was still this sort of idea
Yeah.
that people were wrapping their head around. YouTube had just been purchased for like $1 billion, and people were like, "No one's ever going to want to watch YouTube. Why would people want
Mhm.
to watch things on their screen?"
Mhm.
So I was at the CBC at the time, and I was working in marketing there, and such a different world. I was doing a lot of stuff in sports, which is not really my space. It's your space. It's not my space. But I was, I was really curious to see what was happening, and there was a lot of chatter in the office about ad dollars moving to the internet. And at that time in Canadian media, there was really um, nothing for women at that time that felt real. It all felt a little sugar coated. It all felt a little safe. And I didn't see anything that reflected the way that I spoke with my friends uh, anywhere, really. So
Yeah.
I wanted to create something that was a space where we could share our stories in a voice that felt honest and authentic, um, and kind of make some noise because, yeah, it was a very different era. And I'm glad to say that things have changed significantly, in
Yeah.
that space. But at the time, we really were different than what was happening.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, just the contrast in that, I mean, hearing I was at the CBC, and I mean, obviously, I'm not stirring up anything, but when we think about CBC, we certainly think about a very different demographic in control, in power, and kind of controlling the narrative. So I can only
Yeah.
imagine how kind of in a box that must have felt to not really have that freedom.
Yeah, I think I was also, I mean, I was 26, 27. I was a young woman. I was working in sports. There was a lot of guys. I definitely felt that I couldn't get the sort of respect that I wanted around me. Not
Yeah,
just at CBC. I mean, I had some wonderful bosses there who were men, and this is not an everybody thing,
certainly.
um, but in my experience as a young woman, I found it very difficult to be taken seriously, and so I kind of created a space where I didn't have to, where I didn't have to deal with that. And I don't know if that was conscious at that time or not, but certainly looking back, I kind of see, yeah, like I probably just created my own little world, picked the people who I wanted around it, and just sort of said "f you" to the shit that I was dealing with that I didn't like,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, and it's so ironic. I mean, when you think about that 15 years ago, it sounds like almost creating a safe space, but almost you were kind of doing the opposite. It was almost the rebellion against what was safe and finding a way to
Yeah.
redefine that.
I mean, and I was in film before I was at CBC in film distribution. So I was in the film space, the same era of like Harvey Weinstein. So like life at the office was very different than it would
Yeah,
be today.
yeah. How different do you think? I mean, I hear you saying that. That's twice now you've said it's significantly different. But
Well,
I mean,
I actually don't have even know because I've been doing this for so long that I haven't been back in those spaces. So
yeah,
probably not as different as we'd like it to be, but
yeah,
certainly, I mean, I was objectified on a daily basis when I worked in the film industry, and that was just normal, right? That was
yeah,
just part of the deal.
yeah,
So, uh, hopefully that's not happening for young
yeah,
women today as much, you know? So,
yeah. You hope so.
yeah, yeah,
I want to say that I imagine so, but
yeah,
unfortunately, as somebody who is, by default, still part of the sports world,
right, yeah,
and seeing what women go through still in that space, trying to be
for sure.
professionals in that space and what they're up against,
Yeah.
I would probably suggest it's not anywhere near where we would hope it would
No,
be.
definitely not. No.
Now, going back then, when you look at it, was it how did everybody else kind of receive you? I mean, I've from a distance seen She
Mhm,
Does the City kind of grow into its own space, and in some ways help create a space that didn't exist
mhm,
for a very long time.
mhm,
But I mean, kind of getting into that place where you're reaching out to women and you're trying to create this community, this
mhm,
network that is driven by women.
mhm,
I would assume at the time, at least for women. I mean,
mhm,
I imagine that the audience has grown and evolved, but in the
mhm.
beginning, I would think it was primarily geared towards that demographic. How was that taken? Were people worried about kind of becoming an ally with She Does a City, sharing your view, kind of stirring the pot,
Mm,
or
I think
was it
people thought,
welcomed?
yeah, I think it was welcomed. I think it was edgy. It was very Toronto-centric at that time.
Mhm.
Because life was a lot smaller, like, in the sense that we didn't have the kind of competition that we deal with today, right? Like, now
Yeah.
when people go online, they choose whatever they want around the world, right? Whereas, 16 years ago, people were more looking kind of in their backyard online.
Okay.
It wasn't we the internet hadn't really grown to this it wasn't anything comparable today. Like, we didn't have TikTok where you just go on and you see videos of people making stuff, in different countries all over the world. That's not how
Yeah.
people used the internet. People actually like typed in a URL. They like had a destination. They
Yeah.
weren't they weren't fed stuff the same way. There wasn't the same algorithms and all that kind of stuff. So, back to your original question. I think yeah, people thought it was edgy and interesting and vibrant and a little bit rebellious, and yeah, it added a little dimension to Toronto.
Yeah. So, I mean, in seeing kind of the material and stuff you guys touched on, one of the things you mentioned there was a lot about
Recovery.
recovery, and
Yeah.
I how did that journey kind of evolve for you onto the
Well,
platform?
yeah, that certainly wasn't intentional. So basically, I mean, when I first started, I was a very heavy drinker and I was partying a lot. And, She Does the City started, it was primarily about nightlife and primarily about getting really wasted and then writing about the wild stories that took place, and like some of those things that I wrote back then, if I read them now, I absolutely cringe.
Yeah.
But that was, who I was at that time, and then eventually I hit a wall, and it was apparent that I had to stop drinking or else God knows what, so I did, and it was funny because at that moment, so that would have been, I mean, there was a few false starts, but it was 2010 when I really took it seriously. So that was 3 years after She Does the City started. Um, I thought, "Oh, well, I can't do this anymore because, like, what am I gonna write about?" And I mean, I wasn't alone. A lot of people were the same way. Like, well, there's the end of that because like
Yeah,
what are you gonna write about now that you can't go to these parties, you can't, talk about nightlife, it's not the same. And it's funny how we can get so I don't know, just like blind of like possibility, get narrow ourselves into these spaces to think, oh yeah, well that's, no way we can continue this.
yeah,
Um and little did I know that, like, the world of recovery is enormous, but more than that, it's just that, like, the all the elements of life still exist without alcohol, but I couldn't see
yeah,
that, when I was drinking. It's like, concerts, fashion, like, everything had a sort of, lens over it, and, I didn't know what that looked like when you took that lens off. It's still there. It's better actually because you can enjoy all these things more so because you're not numbing out so yeah, so that was a crossroads for us, and it took me a while. Like I was really shaky for the 2 years after I got sober, because I had been going out all the time, and I was known as somebody who was going out all the time, and then I had to
yeah,
sort of stop.
yeah,
And I felt like, oh my gosh, like I've disappeared. Uh, but then again, also in recovery, you learn that actually nobody gives a shit, nobody cares because everybody's like busy with their own lives. They're not noticing that you're not at these events, really.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, and I had to learn how to socialize again. I had to figure out how to use my hands. I had to figure out how to talk to people, without having 4 drinks in me. I had to get to know myself. And so all that became part of the She Does a City story. It's like interwoven, it's intertwined. I'm like a big knot with the site. Like it's very difficult to sort of separate me from the thing that I created. So, um, I mean, now more so, we've grown a lot bigger and got lots more contributors and that kind of thing. And I've
yeah,
stepped back from being the face for like a few years. I think
yeah.
there's a lot of people out there who, wouldn't know who I was even, but yeah, it's part of our journey.
And I think I mean, obviously, this is a journey that you and I share as somebody who
Mhm.
also has, I haven't had a drink in 23 years now.
Wow, that's amazing.
And it's, there's so many facets of it that just intrigue me. I
Mhm,
mean, beginning with, you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, so what happens to She Does the City if I do this?
mhm.
It's this identity that is something that has become you. And was that something that you felt in yourself? Was it this, this is me, this is my persona, this is who I'm supposed to be, and if I don't have this to offer, I don't have the same offering for She Does the City? Was it that
Yeah, for
connected for you?
sure. Yes, it was very much connected like that, and I didn't know who I was without alcohol. I mean, I had, little ideas of who I was, but it really took a long time to figure out.
Yeah,
I mean, to give even to get the self-confidence to be able to, like, walk in a crowded room
yeah.
and, talk to people, without that identity kind of all over me. So, um yeah, I forget what your question was, but I it was a process. It's still a
Could you
process.
Could you still relate to it though? So I mean, you're looking back and you're thinking, so originally you started this site, this platform,
Mhm,
this everything based on the idea of, this doesn't speak to me or for me. This isn't
mhm,
representative of me and my life, the conversations I have with the people in my life. This doesn't represent so you created this space to basically give yourself that, to give yourself a place to have those conversations and to
mhm,
connect with like-minded people.
mhm,
So having built it up in that context,
mhm,
then you make a decision to quit drinking.
mhm.
And so what were you left with when you came out of that? Did you still relate to it, or did you have to kind of reframe the whole? the whole idea, the whole messaging.
I think it took a while, and then I realized that She Does the City was always about truth telling. Um, but the hardest thing was to tell that truth at that time
Yeah.
because, the space wasn't the way it is today where people kind of share, all the time. People didn't do that as much back then, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and I was cautioned a lot about, if you talk about your issues with drinking, then you're going to be written off, or you will no one's going to want to work with you, or all these types of things. But I had to tell that story because I felt like it was sort of this toxic thing inside of me. I felt like I couldn't do anything honestly with it sort of being inside of me and writing all the time, but not ever, talking about it. So,
Addressing it. Yeah.
yeah, so eventually it took me a year and a half to get to that point where I was comfortable sharing, and my goodness, did it ever feel liberating. And then it almost like, sharing that story reinforced what we were all about to begin with, but it didn't it took time to kind of see the pieces clearly and to figure out that, yes, of course, I should be sharing this story.
Yeah.
This is the biggest story, and it still remains to be the story that I have in me that helps the most people.
Yeah.
And I don't always I kind of shy away from it sometimes. Like, I'll sort of talk about it, and then I'll go for a long, long extended period of time and not talking about it because I have other things I wanna talk about, whether
Yeah.
it's, like, films I love,
Yeah.
or women's rights, or art that I think is cool, or, like, this person's doing this cool thing, or that person's doing this cool thing, and and so but then every time I get back into that spot where I'm sharing, I realize, "Oh, this is the thing that I have to share that
Yeah.
makes the greatest impact." That's
Yes.
everybody I think has a story in them, multiple stories, but there's usually 1 or 2 that it's like, that's the story that you have that will really help people.
Yeah.
And so,
That
um,
maybe feels most purposeful when you're doing
yeah,
that. Yeah.
yeah.
So, people warned you, people cautioned you, people
Mhm.
said, maybe don't
Yeah,
go there. That's too true. That's too
yeah.
honest. That's too real. Um, what was the feedback? I mean, I'm always interested in
Well,
kind of highlighting this because I think it's important for people in their own journey to
mhm.
recognize the possibilities and kind of weigh that risk benefit for themselves. But what was your kind of, were you still accepted? Did that space still exist for you? Or did you
Yeah.
end up with a mountain to climb because of it?
No, it felt like I was flying after that, to be honest.
Yeah.
It was very liberating because, I think anytime you have a secret that's sort of inside you, I think that that's toxic. I think that
Mhm.
secrets are bad. And, um, and so for me personally, it felt really great. The feedback was overwhelmingly supportive. Um, then there was also there was a percentage of people, especially who are, from 12-step programs, that felt that I was sort of breaking rules. Because again, we're talking, almost 15 years ago when I
Yeah.
shared that.
Yeah.
um, People just didn't. There was the way that we approach recovery today, which is, today I think we've acknowledged, largely society has acknowledged, that there's so many different pathways that people get help. That, for some people it's like looks like harm reduction, for other people it looks like just being really, like, you know healthy with fitness and nature and outdoor stuff, and some people it's like creativity, and then there's all sorts of different spaces and communities that people can join. This is not like, a negative thing against AA, which saved my life, which is always somewhere that I recommend people go to begin with,
Okay.
because it's a very accessible, and it works for many people. um but it's not the only space.
Yep.
And,
Yep.
so there was definitely people who thought I had crossed a line, but it was worth it.
What's the line? Help me to understand that. Only and
Oh, okay.
I'm not trying to play, I'm not I
Oh,
just for me personally, my journey with sobriety didn't involve, the 12-step
Right.
program. So for me
Yeah, I mean, there's rules in AA that are you're not supposed to talk about AA. So,
okay,
there you
okay.
go. That's, like, one of the big rules. So
There it is.
so
We
as
don't
soon as
talk
I
about Big Bump.
as soon as I talked about recovery, and I remember even then, like, like, the words Alcoholics Anonymous, I didn't even use them. I used, I don't know, like, something like amazing, awesome, or something like, I forget what it
Okay,
was that but
okay.
I even, like, those little changes were
Yeah,
important for people. So,
okay.
I think that there's still a lot of people who would say that, that mentioning Alcoholics Anonymous in any way online is, like, a no-no, big time, but I
I don't
disagree.
understand.
I disagree, so there you go.
Uh-oh, uh-oh. That's that was recording.
Yeah.
Uh, I just I do I and it that's intriguing to me only because,
Mhm.
as somebody one who's ignorant to the
Mm,
process and the program and, the steps in themselves, I
right.
mean, I've heard the references you see in movies, and I've heard
Mhm.
the but that wasn't my journey, not
Yeah,
it just simply wasn't
yeah,
how sobriety was achieved for me.
right.
Um, but and is there a way for you to answer this without causing issues?
I don't care anymore,
Okay,
honestly,
good.
just
Okay,
yeah.
good. Let's go with that then, because I don't know how to tiptoe and I don't know how to
Mhm.
be diplomatic about certain things. What exactly is the reasoning behind not talking about something that is in and
Uh,
itself meant to help people?
I mean,
Like, how do you
I don't
how
know. I
how do you
think that
learn?
I I I don't know, and that's why I had to break that rule, is because I
Yeah,
think that for me, it didn't make sense, that I mean, even now, today, there's a lot of misconception about recovery. Like, even now, today, with all the books and all the strong voices and all the
yeah,
people sharing
yeah.
on social media platforms, people are still, confused about when they should seek getting help, when they need
Mhm,
to make changes. Like,
mhm.
and, people still ask themselves, like, well, or they say, "Well, I'm not an alcoholic, so I'm okay." And I mean, that kind of thinking is not helpful to anybody, because really, and I feel like I'm going off topic here, but really, if you have an issue in your life, whatever that looks like,
Yeah,
and you feel like there's something that's sort of bubbling to the surface, it feels like, "Oh, this doesn't feel healthy to
yeah,
me." That's enough of a reason to, labels, and, feeling like you need to fit some profile to
yeah,
make a
yeah,
change is gonna act as a barrier for so many people.
absolutely.
Um, so yeah, I mean, I forget where we go. Yes, I don't know. I think it was just that you're in in Alcoholics Anonymous. You're supposed to be humble. You're supposed to be not sort of standing in the spotlight, and
Okay.
making a big deal, being a publicist for this, um, network. So, but I mean, these are rules again that were written in, I think, the 1940s. So
Yeah,
I feel
yeah.
like we've made
Done something differently?
taken some distance from that era. Yeah.
I don't even think we've had this discussion yet. Do you know that the name of this podcast is Speakeasy with Kendra Fisher?
Oh,
Now
I
you're
love
really in
it.
trouble.
Yeah, I love it.
'Cause well, and I mean, that's the thing. I mean, as somebody who also has a journey and who's also had my own challenges, I
Hmm.
think that and I mean, obviously to the point of exactly what you're saying right now is silence in any capacity it's only going to harm us it's
Yeah.
that whole design for secrecy and the belief systems that kind of support that I think really limit people's ability to recognize there are so many of us taking similar journeys who benefit from learning from one another
Yeah.
and learning from other people's missteps and what
Yeah.
worked and what didn't work and
Hmm.
why and
Hmm.
drawing those relationships. So that's I mean, that's certainly funny that now you're really now you're really in it.
Hmm.
Um, so one of the things you said that I want to go back to because I think it's so important in terms of, the world of recovery
Mhm.
was around having to learn how to socialize again.
Yep.
Was it just learning to socialize, or did you actually have to create an entirely new social circle as well?
Well, I was definitely somebody who was going to, my whole life in my 20s and that first year in my 30s was like drinking in excess, bar hopping, out till 3 in the morning, hitting the after party.
Yeah.
So yeah, life didn't look like that after I stopped drinking. Um, yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that strikes me most today, even when I look back, is that I didn't know how to use my body. Like I was so used to
Yeah.
holding a drink and holding a cigarette
Yeah.
that when I mean, I still smoked a little bit after I stopped drinking because I needed something. But I I had to figure out what to do with my hands,
Yeah.
and, I mean, I think it's so I mean, now when I walk into a room, I'm not like I'm not thinking
Fidgeting.
like I'm not like that, but I
Yeah.
was like that. I was like, "How do I like, what do I do?" And, I mean, obviously, I would just get, like, a ginger ale or something like that,
Yeah.
but it was noticeable how uncomfortable I was being
Yeah.
raw.
Yeah.
I felt like I needed that social lubricant to sort of
Yeah.
even just be. Um, yeah, and it's also, talking about that sort of fidgety stuff. I was sitting next to a woman on a bus, I don't know, a few years ago, and I noticed that her legs were shaking uncontrollably, and that was me. Like I was always that person, like never comfortable sitting still, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I even remember when back in high school when, you know, my parents went to the parent teacher interviews and they're like, "Did you know that Jen just sort of walks around the room? Like she doesn't actually sit still."
Yeah.
And so for me, learning to sit still has been and just be okay with like being me and like sitting
Yeah.
with me
Yeah.
has been something that's really taken a lot of time and it's still a learning process. Um, So, I was in a meditation group yesterday, and I even noticed that, like, I sort of opened my eyes in the middle of meditation. It was like a Zoom, and, like, everybody else had their eyes closed, and I was sorta like, "Oh, let me just check my phone for a second," and I was like, "See, I still have that," like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not totally relaxed, but I've come a long way.
I think that's a constant journey though. I know,
Yeah.
for me too, and just my anxiety and my panic. I remember,
Mhm.
yoga was a tool that I used to start learning kind of mindfulness, meditation, deep
Mhm.
breathing. And I remember in the beginning of these classes, I'd go in there and it would be like, okay, lay on the mat and be still. And there was so much chaos in me that it was the
Yeah.
most uncomfortable,
Yeah.
like 3 minutes of my life was
Yeah.
just this, like, what is this be still and
Mhm.
just be content with living in here? Does anybody know what's going on in here?
Right.
Um, so I don't know because I don't know well enough where you're at with regards to your recovery or how you exist in your recovery. So,
Mhm.
correct me or tell me to stop. Um, for me, I'm somebody who ironically my recovery kind of took this shift, this transition into okay, like I feel comfortable here. I feel
Mhm.
confident enough in my recovery
Mhm.
that, I can be in a bar, I can be at a
Mhm.
restaurant. I'm happy to serve you a beer if you come
Right.
to my house.
Yeah.
Um, did you ever find that your recovery kind of flipped and transitioned into how do you make everybody else okay with the fact that you're not drinking?
Mm.
Like, I would get to this point where it would be like, people didn't want to invite me out because it was like, "Okay, we don't know how to socialize with you. Like, we don't know
Right.
how to invite you into this space." Or if they were just fearful maybe that
Yeah.
like, I was gonna fall off the wagon because I was in a setting that it existed or
Yeah, I think breaking the ice was key. So when I was about a year and a half sober, I started seeing somebody new. I had gone through a divorce and all this stuff and Jamie, who's my current partner,
Yeah.
was so, like, we would sort of sit down at a restaurant, and he'd be like, "Jen's not drinking," and it was just sort of this, like, and I was like, "Oh my god," like, what is he that is so yeah, I was but it actually worked because then
Yeah.
it was but then because then everybody was just like, "Okay, cool," like, "What
Yeah.
would you like? What would you like then?"
Yeah.
And it's funny because he is a sommelier. He works like, he's deeply involved in
Okay.
the wine
Yeah.
and beer business. So, I mean, I live with alcohol like this in my face, like, all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
I used to joke that I probably signed for more wine deliveries in Toronto than anybody for like a good, you know, many years, because he would be receiving boxes and boxes of stuff for his work. So yeah, getting back to the beginning of this question, which I'm losing track of, but uh, I don't know. Like, I think at the beginning it was sort of awkward for sure. I remember those first holiday parties being like, having to sort of give myself a time limit, like, I'll go
Yeah.
dip in, but I think the best thing I did was just say no to things. I mean, I just didn't
Yeah.
go for a long time,
Okay.
and people are nervous to do that, but like I said, no one really, I mean, maybe people be like, "Oh, that's weird that she's not here," but everybody has, their own 5,000 things happening in their own personal lives that
Yeah.
nobody's really considering it.
Yeah.
It's okay to just say no until you're comfortable.
Yeah.
And while I'm sharing all this with you, like, I have memories of those early months where Friday nights and Saturday nights were so hard because, like, I could
Yeah.
practically hear the party, like, on Dundas because I didn't live far from there. I could practically, like, I could feel the energy in the air, but I was like in my room staring at the ceiling. And in those moments, it's really important to have a game plan because that's when you
Yeah.
can kind of like quickly be like, "Oh, fuck it. I'm just gonna,"
I'm going.
yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, I called a lot of friends. Um, and sometimes I didn't want to, but I just did because that's what I was told to do, that what would work. And it did work. As
Yeah.
soon as you
Yeah.
sort of like speak to somebody else, whatever is like looping in your head, whatever is sort of, it just kind of drops down. So yeah, but it was an adjustment period. And like now, I mean, now I can do anything. Like, for many years I've been able to do whatever, but I
Yeah.
choose not to do some things, right? Like, I think more it's probably more my age now that, you won't catch me out past 10 really, cuz like,
10.
no, I
My
have no
goodness.
desire. I have like zero
Girl,
desire.
I'm lucky if I make it out of, like, putting my
7.
kids to bed at
Yeah.
7.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I mean, it's funny when you think back, like, I was used to be the person who just went bounced and bounced and bounced until it was, sunrise, and, like, that is my idea of hell now, so
Yeah, yeah. I understand that from both a cognitive and very visceral
mm, mhm,
place. It's,
mhm,
not a good place to exist. Um, Coming out of this now, I
mm,
mean, so, eh, I coming out of looking back, I say carefully, I very much recognize that it's a constant journey and that
mhm,
it's, as much as we find safety in the space between us and the last drink,
mhm,
it's, there's always possibilities. So
mhm,
it's, not downplaying that at all, but looking back now and seeing kind of where the world is with this now and being involved in, she does the city and the recovery stories that you guys
mhm,
share. Are
mhm.
you noticing more and more that this is a choice people are making?
Yes and no. I think there is massive change happening, and, even tomorrow I'm talking to somebody who has founded a company, like an umbrella company that distributes non-alcoholic wine and beer and, like, tasty stuff, like really
Yeah. Yeah.
high-end premium products. They're called Clear Sips, and, like,
Oh
but
my gosh, I was
you know
just
them?
about to say it.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
love it.
so, I mean, but that was, like, nothing like that was really happening ages ago, and
Mhm.
so there is definitely, like, if you go into restaurants these days, like, any restaurant that's doing things right,
Yeah.
should have, like, some nice options on the menu for non-alcoholic drinks. So there's been a huge shift that way. I think there's also been a huge shift in that choosing to not drink isn't just associated with problem drinking, it's
Yeah.
associated with healthy choices, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's a lot of people who choose not to drink now that never had an issue that was
Mhm.
looked anything like what I was dealing with,
Yeah.
but they just choose not to because they're into being healthy and they want, they want to live a long healthy life and like this is
Yeah.
their choice. And
Yeah.
so, health wasn't glamorized the same way as it is today or even recognized or anything like that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But at the same, you know, what's still happening though is that there's still so many women that are scared about getting help, that are scared about making those changes, that are scared of being stigmatized, losing their job, like, being judged, shame, all that kind of stuff. Um, so I think that because I've been in it, and you're probably the same, like I have been in a recovery space for so long that my network has grown and grown and grown and grown.
Yeah.
So that, now let's say like 60%, 50% of my friends on my Facebook, for instance, are probably people who are, sober or
Yeah.
in recovery or something like
Yeah.
that. So my perspective has changed. So I'm in the middle, but I have to remember that a lot of people are still in a space where 95% of the people around them
Yeah.
are drinking heavily, and that's what their normal is, right? So my
Yeah.
normal has shifted quite a bit.
Yeah.
So I'm always sort of surprised when people ask me, but how do you tell, like, if you decide not to drink when you're like at an office party or something, what do you say? Or like when I'm out with my friends for,
Yeah.
a weekend, like, how do I say? And I'm like, well, you just tell them you don't wanna drink, like,
Yeah.
you just say, I'm not drinking tonight," or like, I'm taking a break because it wasn't working for me," or,
Yeah.
I've really just, like, I had too many hangovers and I don't like it anymore." But it's still such this huge thing that a lot of
Yeah.
people can't wrap their head around, because alcohol is so it's in every part of our daily lives. It's part of our rituals. It's part of our celebrations and traditions and all this kind of stuff that people can't imagine going to a wedding or a baby shower or an office thing or
Yeah.
birthday party and not. It's like
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Yeah.
So yeah, in that regard, I still think that yeah, we have a lot of way to go, and I think also the mommy drinking culture thing is, like, still ridiculous, and I have
What is this? What is
what
I don't I'm so unfamiliar with this, so I'm sorry, what?
well,
The
I
mummy
mean,
drinking thing?
there's a kind of culture, and maybe it's gotten a little bit better, but I wrote about it a few years ago in the Toronto Star, and whoa, did I ever make every a lot of people angry, but
Uh-oh.
basically, it's like it's sort of it's like, okay, so when you go into if you're in a sub community online, let's say like a
Yep.
group for moms,
Yep. Yep.
and you say, like I've had a really tough week. Like my toddler's been having so many tantrums. Like my partner's doing this, blah 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 blah. Whatever. And then there'd be sort of like this sort of thread of advice, and I swear half of it was like,
Get the wine.
yeah,
Yeah.
LCBO, like,
Now I know.
go grab a bottle of wine. And I mean, there's
Yeah.
all these like memes about it and just sort
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
back to school, like jokey things and, whatever. And it's basically the culture that I'm referring to
Yep.
is using wine um, as a must have tool to survive motherhood,
Yep.
right? And it's
Yep.
sort of jokey thing, but it's actually not a fucking joke because
Yeah.
there are so many moms that
Yeah.
are like, completely lives are imploding
Yeah.
because they've used this as a coping mechanism
Yeah.
and it's become a huge fucking problem in their lives.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, I got sober before I had my son, but it is a whole other scary beast to
Yeah.
to deal with sobriety and recovery when you have kids because
I
there's
can't even
always
imagine.
yeah, well, I
Yeah.
mean, there's all the I mean, first of all, it's this whole other like, I can't even imagine ever being hungover with a 2-year-old to begin with.
No. No, like,
Like,
I can
I
barely
can't
tolerate daylight savings. Like,
yeah, I
I'm
know.
still recovering from, like, 3 days of waking up
Yeah,
before
exactly.
5 because my
Yeah.
kids are like, "Woohoo."
So, I mean, but then you think about, well, there's always that sort of, but if the wrong person finds out, like, will I be separated from my
Yeah.
kids or that
Yeah.
kind of thing? Like that is something that I didn't have to deal with at all. Like,
Yeah.
it's a whole different thing. But my point being is that this kind of culture of moms drinking to get through motherhood, to bond, because everything else is lacking, like the community
Yeah.
supports in place are lacking, is a really
Yeah.
unhealthy thing.
No,
And I know that people are like, whenever I sort of speak up about it, people are like, if a mom wants to enjoy a glass of wine, let her, like, blah, blah. I'm like,
yeah.
look, I'm not trying to like, I'm not saying don't enjoy a glass of wine. I'm just saying let's not have this sort of messaging that we need
Yeah.
alcohol to handle motherhood or
To
that,
be a mom, yeah.
or that motherhood is intolerable without a bottle of wine, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I never considered it. And I mean, it makes good sense because it's true. I
Yeah.
guess, again, having been in a position now where more of my life has been spent without alcohol than
Mm.
with. I mean, I've now been sober more than half my life, which
Yeah.
is there's a whole lot of these kind of life situations where
You
that
are
wasn't something I could
right.
fall back on. That wasn't,
Yeah.
it wasn't part of my thought process or my
Yeah.
conversation. So it didn't even occur to me. And I hear the jokes all the time, but I
Yeah.
guess because it was so removed from me, the implication isn't
Yeah.
considered. But as
I
somebody who works in mental health and as somebody who
Mhm,
works in the spaces of, addictions and substance abuse,
mhm.
I mean, that's a very valid point from what I can tell.
Yeah, no, I think it has maybe shifted a little bit since I was a new mom because I mean, my son is 8 now. But, I remember feeling very alone in those
Yeah.
spaces because I was like, "I don't have that option, guys, like, I'm not gonna
Yeah.
go drink a bottle of
What's
wine
plan
because."
B?
Yeah, exactly, and, I didn't find it funny, and I found it kind
No.
of just sad and upsetting, so
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and it's so true too. I mean, that other kind of reference to and not just the judgment, but the fear. I mean, I think that
yeah,
that's something that's so common for women in a lot of spaces, but that
right,
would be one that would be amplified would be,
yeah,
who's going to hold this against me?
right, exactly.
And
Yeah,
where do I go from here? And
yeah.
so, where do you I find it interesting too, just to go back to and I mean, Clearsips is just going to get a shameless promo here.
Mhm,
I actually came across them at a conference I was speaking at not long ago, and I have found that movement towards like the premium near beers and the
mhm,
mocktails and everything. I have found it really helpful for me
mhm.
because I find that as I was saying, about that transition of trying to make others comfortable, and maybe I just needed to get better at the I'm just not drinking, get over it.
Right.
But I found some kind of peace in, if you're holding something that looks like a drink, people
Yeah,
ask less questions and
that's true. Yeah,
you don't feel like you have to come up with an explanation. Not that you
yeah.
should have to in the first place.
No, yeah. No,
But
it's a
there's
good change, yeah.
yeah, there's so many settings where that's the case. You get in there and it's like and even now, like I have
Mhm,
people who in my life um have known I haven't had a drink in as long as it's been, and it's still completely okay to them if, this big life event happens or something. Well, come on now, you can have just one drink. And I'm just like,
yeah.
that's not really how it works.
Right,
Like, it's
yeah,
no, I'm grateful that you would forgive me for having a drink, but I'm not drinking because I
yeah,
am looking for the approval. And
yeah.
so
Wow.
in that space now, like kind of
Mhm,
in that world,
mhm,
and with you being able to kind of create, I don't wanna say a mirror, but it's cool to me that you're able to kind of have that space grow within your work life as well, and
mhm.
incorporate that messaging, share that messaging. And so, right now, what's kind of your push. Like when you look at that space in your work life,
Mhm.
having achieved what you have personally and being in a confident place with where you are personally, when you're sharing that messaging at work, is it kind of a push to have people get that information, or is it simply just a platform that people can share those experiences now?
Um, yeah, it remains to so we started this thing called our New Voices Fund, in 2021, and it is still about giving a platform for people to share, their story, and amplifying their voice and, what their message is, um, because I still think that, especially as like writers, the media industry has like crumbled a lot significantly in the past
Yeah,
10 years. It's very difficult to get a start. Um, so there's that. But I also just think that there's anybody can obviously go to their own social media platform and share about something in their life, but there's
yeah,
something validating and much more powerful when somebody else sort of takes that story and says, this we want to share this with our audience. This is
yeah,
powerful.
yeah,
That's a different kind of thing, and even like me
yeah,
being here with you today, is different than me talking about what I do on my own platform, right? It's like
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like I'm reaching a different audience. You're
yeah,
asking me questions about things I haven't thought about.
yeah,
Um and so yeah, like I feel, She Does the City still has a strong mandate to amplify women's voices. And also, like, we're in a really messed up time for women
yeah,
right
yeah,
now, for non-binary transgender people. Like, it 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 actually feels, we've rolled back, right? Like things have become, uh or rights are eroding,
yeah,
platforms are eroding. Like these, we're actually in a worse space now than we
yeah,
were 10 years ago. It feels
yeah,
like, So,
yeah,
um, so yeah, like that's still very important for us to give people that platform. In terms of recovery, it is something we still concentrate on. Um, but the word recovery has expanded to mean so many different things, right? So at the beginning, it was about my recovery, but now it's about whatever that word means for you. And,
yeah,
we as a society are constantly recovering from all sorts of things,
yeah, yeah,
like we look at climate crisis, racism, COVID, mental health issues, a rise of domestic abuse. Like recovery is encompasses it all. So I think now, what started more as like a, yeah, let's talk a little bit about drinking and not
yeah,
drinking and that kind of
yeah,
thing. It's like, wait a minute, like
yeah,
all of this is related, and
yeah,
when people can recover from their own personal stuff, whatever that looks like, eating disorder, anxiety, self-harming, the myriad of things that the humans deal with, then they become stronger to then help communities recover, or they can reach a hand out and then help sort of
yeah,
bigger things recover. And I think right now we're facing such enormous problems, that
yeah,
we all have to be our strongest selves to to fight,
yeah.
so.
So, and I couldn't agree more. I think the decline has been just terrifying. I
Mhm.
think that, some of the most basic of what we took for granted and have now seen over the past years kind of how far back we can actually be pushed and allow ourselves to be pushed. It's terrifying to me, and I think, concurrently, that's why we are seeing such a decline in mental health, and we're seeing such a
Yeah,
decline in wellness overall and quality of life,
yeah,
and people who are really struggling with these issues. So, you just said that so many of these platforms are imploding, and so many of them are being, not your words, mine, but almost bastardized by all of these kind of different forces
right.
of, how we are mistreating others.
Right.
And so if people want to, so I mean, for my listeners and for those people who hear this, the opportunity to have a platform, and as you said, there's a certain level of validation that comes from sharing your journey in a place that's not your own, that's not
Yeah.
just safe, and it almost offers a sense of accountability as well. I know for
Right.
me, once you say it out loud and you give it an opportunity to live beyond the safety of where you
Mhm.
usually kind of whisper
Mhm.
into your
Mhm.
own
Mhm.
thoughts, that accountability is also very powerful because it
Mhm.
gives others an opportunity to become part of that movement of togetherness, of
Mhm.
community.
Mhm.
And so, for anybody who's listening and for anybody who is, and not just with, I love the idea, the concept, the reality of recovery and the evolution of what recovery truly is. It isn't just relevant to substance abuse
Mhm.
or um, disordered use of. I think that recovery is something our entire world needs to be striving towards right now.
Mhm.
And so, with She Does the City, with the platform you guys use, with the ability to share those voices,
Mhm.
what's your kind of what would you hope that those people who are willing to have a place to stand up, or
Mhm.
who may be somebody who could join in that voice,
Mhm.
is that something that's available through your platform, or how do people get involved?
Well, with the New Voices Fund, we have a budget set aside so that we can pay people to write their stories, to share their stories, and we only are able to choose 2 or 3 a month, so it
Yeah.
is a little bit limiting that way. But, I mean, we get also it also the stories kinda come in indirectly too. So, everybody who's got emerging filmmakers that have made a documentary about something that's really meaningful to them or written a book, like, we share a lot of stories by storytellers,
Yeah.
small businesses that, have, values that align with ours, and so
Yeah.
that's also a form of sharing.
Absolutely.
It's not necessarily like I had an eating disorder for 10 years and, like, let's share that story. It's like there's all sorts of different ways that it kind of shows up.
Absolutely.
So yeah, so I mean, I guess if you are interested in sharing your story, you can reach out to be considered for like a freelance, um, paid piece. If you're a established writer, if you're somebody who has less than 20 bylines, then you can be considered for our New Voices Fund. But also, if you have a cool project that you already have. Like you already have a podcast, you already have, you're
Yeah.
working on a book, you're doing this cool thing, you work in an office that has this like cool campaign that's going on, like that's also stuff that we share.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I mean we're constantly evolving, Kendra. Like I'm always figuring out what we're doing and questioning
Yeah.
what we're doing and figuring and I'm not gonna lie, like these past few years has been like what direction are we going in? Like
Yeah.
it feels really it feels like we're in a bit of a storm right now
Yeah. Yeah.
with media, and like even if you look at what's happened on Twitter in the past week, it's like, I don't know where anybody's
I
going,
know. I
It's
know.
like, and we've seen a lot of platforms, fall apart,
Yeah.
in the past couple of years, like Refinery 29 Canada is gone. Now Magazine is gone. Like, it's definitely a turbulent time out there for a lot of industries,
Yeah.
especially I would say media for sure.
Yeah. Well, and I think one of the things that one, I hope that you are proud of your journey because, I mean, again, as somebody who's watched it from afar, as somebody who, had a year of, being in your space and knowing you as I did, as much or little as it was, and kind of watching this journey from afar, seeing that, I mean, obviously, She Does the City, when it first came out, it amplified that party scene, and then watching
Mm.
your journey unfold alongside, it's been incredible to see, and
Oh, thank you,
a a,
Kendra.
a testament to kind of, what happens when you let your journey play out. And so if
Yeah.
there's anything that I can, share with listeners who may be hearing this is, um if nothing else, other than to explore that lived experience of others
Mhm.
and finding platforms where we can find those honest voices of of others who are going through similar situations, I just think it's so powerful. I mean,
It is so powerful, and, like, I mean, what you do is so powerful, and I think that we forget that, because we all you do forget that your story just the other day, I had my what did I 12 years sober,
yep,
anniversary.
congratulations.
I'm like, what year was it again? I don't can't remember. So, yeah, 12 years, and, I put that out there on my platforms, like, on my social media platforms, less for me. It's more just, like, because I know every time I do it, like, it hits somebody who's like,
Absolutely.
"Thank you." Like, I'm alone. I
Yeah,
don't know what to do, and,
yeah,
like, without fail, whenever I do
yeah,
that, somebody, will contact me, and, I think it is easy to forget that because we are in a space now where people are sharing all the time everywhere. You can kind of think, well, I don't know if my what I have to say really impacts anybody, or and I go through that all the time. I think that,
yeah,
I think those thoughts, but it does. It might not be your exact story, but there are elements of it, parts of it that that's exactly what that person needed to hear that day, you know?
yeah. Well, and I think it's also the reality, you can bring it back to very simple, which is, you know what? I remember seeing Jen's posts back then. I wonder how she's doing. And that
Right.
follow up and that sharing of information, it matters
Mhm.
because ultimately there's going to be people wondering if you made it. There's going to be people
Mhm.
wondering if they can make it. There's going to be
Right.
people who don't believe 12 years is possible,
Yeah.
or people who saw, not that I'm sitting here, it's not like, hey, you were such a hot mess, but like, hey, I remember Jen back then.
Mhm. Mhm.
And,
Mhm.
wow, look at this now. And,
Yeah,
and,
well,
and I think there's you know what I mean? Like, and
yeah.
I'm not being an asshole, like,
Yeah,
but
well, we were both pretty wild. I mean, I
and it
definitely
matters though,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
It
for sure.
matters, and we don't recognize it, and it feels boisterous sometimes to be like, "Oh, hey, guess what, guys? This
Mhm.
just," but at the end of the day, you can't share the honesty of your journey without also offering to share those successes, I think, because
Mhm.
there's relevance to them.
Yeah, for sure.
So
Yeah.
don't sit there and question yourself. You just
Yeah.
you just keep
Oh,
letting us know
thanks.
how
Thank you.
amazing you're doing, and
Thank
and
you.
you
Yeah.
shout that from the mountains because you know what? The world needs more good news these days, and
That's for sure. Yeah.
so I think, you know what? I'm so grateful we were finally able to do this, through both of our messy lives and the chaos of the past few years. This hasn't exactly been an easy road, and I mean, very small taste of what it must be like in media in terms of just trying to stay with continuity and
Yeah,
consistency.
it's I feel like every day you're like, "Whoa," like, "What's
Yeah,
happening today?" It's,
yeah, yeah,
um yeah, but, I know I am so thankful that you reached out, and I know at the beginning of this, you sort of said you were like this stranger in high school. I thought you were so cool, and I still remember, like, it's funny, before we getting on this phone, connected today, I it's like I have, like, those memories from in the '90s of, like, partying and
yeah,
excess,
yeah,
and it is cool to connect, so many years later.
yeah,
Um
yeah,
and, obviously no one has it all figured out, but it's nice to see that you're feeling good today, and that we're both in a place that feels so much more stronger than where we
yeah,
were back then,
yeah,
and healthier, um,
absolutely.
and that we're here, a
I
lot of
was
people
terrified
don't
there.
yeah.
I was terrified. I remember walking into Havergal my first day of school and just being like, "Oh, wow." Like,
Oh, I don't blame you.
of all the places in the world that I never pictured myself walking into, this
Yeah.
might be the top of the list. I was small town kid. You guys just seemed so put together and seemed like you had it figured out, and
Well, people didn't know that, and that's like you always have these ideas in your head, like, oh my God, I, I don't fit in here. But
yeah,
on the
yeah,
outside, you're you're like the cool outsider that people look up to and sort of think, yeah, I like her style. I like her the way she holds herself. So
I'll take that. I'll
Yeah.
take that. I was, like, such an awkward, terrified kinda, like, every day just being like, "Oh my gosh, I hope they don't notice that I don't even know."
Yeah.
It was something, and you know what? It was one of the best years of my life, to be honest. I loved it there.
Mm,
I my only regret about Havergal was that I only got to spend a year there because
mm,
it was a good environment for me, but
mhm.
that was also the year that I got sick, and that was the year that I quit Team Canada, and my life was
Um,
falling apart, and
right. Yeah.
I was trying to pretend that it wasn't that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's like whole that's part 2 is me
Right.
just, I it's kinda crazy to hear that, just knowing where I was in my life and what I was going through, and to be able to pull off the cool outsider. I'll take that any day.
Yeah.
Sounds made up, but I'll take it.
No.
But Jen, thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your
Yeah.
time today, and for sharing and being honest and being real in a world that it is so hard to figure out what is real anymore. So
It is
just
so hard.
you know what? Thank you for being here with me today, and I wish you the best, and I know we will cross paths again soon.
Yes. Thank you so much, Kendra. It's such a pleasure.
Absolutely. You take care,
Okay.
and I will yeah, we'll be in touch.
Sounds good.